One thing is certain, that far too many people believe that the third eye has opened fully, when in fact it is only beginning to stir. No person can in any way understand to what extent the third eye brings him powers. It's not possible for the average person to say, my third eye is opened. That is a misnomer, a wrong statement. You're not in a position to understand the implications of a fully open third eye, and you would never be in such a position to make such a statement. You would never know when the process had stopped. And so there is a lot of nonsense spoken about the matter of the opening of the third eye. That it does open progressively, that it takes time, is certain. It is a slow, natural process. It is not usually a rapid affair. Having said that, it is true that having reached a previous stage of development in a last life, the third eye may be opened up to that level pretty quickly in this life. But after that, it becomes quite a long, drawn-out process. However, tonight we're going to consider some features of the matter of the third eye, which would be of value to us in the stages of bringing it into, shall we say, creativeness. The third eye is functioning in many people, but not yet at the creative level. The third eye usually comes into creative function when man begins the last journey around the zodiac. Here in this room we have considered the three stages of spiritual unfoldment. 2 rounds of the zodiac in a clockwise direction, expending some 700-odd lives in the process. Then finally a reversal on the zodiacal wheel, in which we expend our last 40-odd lives, 40 to 70 lives, in this final path of return, anti-clockwise. In fact, what is happening is that the monad, the spiritual spark of the divine in us, is beginning to call, through the soul, is beginning to call the individual back to the Father's home. The prodigal son is treading the path of return. One can use symbols to express this quite effectively. That might be the first stage of the call of the monad, the call of the Father in heaven to the prodigal son to return. But as he returns, he ascends and he is overshadowed by the soul. So the monad, the soul, and the integrated personality become one. The third eye is not a process that is related just to one specific part of you. It must embrace the changes must embrace the whole individual. Tonight we're going to look at some of these vast changes that we undergo in the process of opening the third eye. You will remember that I pointed out that the third eye is related to the unfolding of 3 head centers. 3 head centers are unfolded progressively. They arise from points of fire associated with these 3 head centers. And these points of fire together are the jewel in the lotus. They are the jewel in the lotus. They are the anchorage point for the soul itself. The higher self or soul eventually anchors itself to the 3 head centers and thereafter begins to open these head centers progressively. They progressively become opened as the entry of the spiritual fire into this triad. They sparkle as the jewel of the lotus, and we considered how these 3 head centers in opening begin to, as it were, overlap each other. With their overlapping, there emerges the functioning faculties of the third eye. We saw that the third eye itself emerges in the vortex created by these three centers, where they overlap. The third eye emerges, and we also considered how the third eye has a positive outgoing function, and it has equally so a receptive function, receiver, and it is a transmitter of spiritual energies. Now, we're concerned tonight with the opening, primarily, of these three head centers. How are they opened? We need to look at them more closely. We need to relate them anatomically to certain parts of man's anatomy. We say that the center here, which is called the outer major chakra, the center here called the outer major chakra, is related to a small gland lying in the carotid, the divisions of the carotid artery in the neck. This carotid body is the endocrine gland for this center here called the outer major. We know also that there is a center in the brow region which progressively opens, and that this center is related to the pituitary gland that lies in a bony saddle in the base of the skull just above the roof of the mouth. So that is its endocrine gland, the pituitary. We also know that the 1,000-petaled lotus, or Sahasrara, has related to it, from our studies in the first part of this talk, has related to it the pineal gland, the so-called uterus of the brain. The pineal gland is the endocrine gland related to Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus. Now we will consider the opening of these three centers in order. The first center, the outer major center, has as its lower ego the thyroid gland and the 16-petaled lotus of the neck center. The neck center, or the 16-petaled lotus, is the center which receives energy from the sacral area, And so we say that the initial creative energies of the sacral region, which enable us to procreate, to recreate our own images, that this energy is progressively led up to the throat center. And indeed, the throat center must first be opened before its higher ego, the outer major center, can function. Just as we are creative in the lower region of the sacral area, so too must we become creative at a higher level. The energies of the sacral area are sublimated. The individual learns not to spend his energies in the processes of procreation, especially when that function is no longer required of him, but to direct them in outward expression by drawing them up to the throat and expressing himself in the outer world through active intelligence. However, we're concerned tonight with the process which enables the energy of this center to be donated to its alter ego, to its higher center, the outer major chakra. How is this done? How is this done? Well, we have to consider, first of all, that this energy is an energy that is sacred, that it must be used somehow for humanity, for all mankind. And indeed, this is true because we say that the individual must serve mankind. And indeed, if the individual is not concerned in some way with the uplift of mankind in general, or specific groups of mankind in particular, then this center is unlikely to open at its correct speed or evolutionary rate. So this center is related to service to mankind. Service to mankind. It's a very difficult matter to explain, and people are inclined to think that it is so gimmicky as not to be of value. But there is no way around it. However, having said that, let me try and give an explanation for how the energy works. If you are to serve or help a family in distress, there's the family in distress, and you are able to serve them, to help them, to assist them along the way, you automatically become part of them. You automatically become part of them. You become part of a greater whole. Or you may serve your community and become part of that greater whole, or the nation, or whatever you have, which is whatever quality you have to express may enable you to reach a group and serve them. And so in serving mankind we become part of a greater whole. Part of a greater whole. Now when you become part of greater wholes, you are entitled to the energy that serves that greater whole. Not just the energy that serves your wholeness, and indeed until you have a wholeness of personality, until you have an integrated personality, you will be cut short of energy. Having achieved wholeness, if you then serve a greater whole, more energy will flow through you. You are eligible for it. I'm going to use another kind of analogy. I'm going to say, what is the difference between the energy contained in a wheat grain, there's a grain of wheat, and the energy of the same amount of wheat grain but crushed up into particles of flour? We would say from the esoteric point of view that there is more energy in the wheat grain than there is in the grain crushed up into flour. Much more energy in the whole grain than in the parts of the grain. Out of that there arises that form of cooking which we call macrobiotics. And in macrobiotics we try and eat whole things, whole nuts, whole fruits, whole grain, because there is a subtle, etheric energy incorporated in a unified whole as compared to a disintegrated same amount of material. If you can understand that, then you will understand that in serving others and becoming part of greater wholes, we avail ourselves of an increase of cosmic energy. Now, that's the best way that I can put that extremely difficult proposition. That's the first stage, is increasingly to serve mankind. At the same time as you are doing this, you may, and there are many millions of people in the world who give a lot of service to mankind. At the same time as that is done, however, we say that breathing rhythmically for mankind makes the process even more rapid. And by breathing rhythmically for mankind, we mean that the breathing must be related to the act of service. You must breathe for another. If you do anything for another, you do breathe for them. You are exerting yourself for them, you are breathing for them. And there is an esoteric factor related to whatever you do in service, related to the breathing that you do when you do the act of service. And so we say that you need to learn to breathe rhythmically when engaged in the service of mankind. Now that service may not necessarily mean dropping in on a family and leaving a £5 note for their groceries. It could be a service that you render them from the quietness of your own room. Certainly, every person who is opening the third eye should learn to visualize whatever group he is part of, and whilst visualizing the group, should become engaged in rhythmic breathing exercises. Let us take an example, for instance. You may be a member of a healing group, and you may not necessarily be able to attend the group meetings. You may not indeed be able to reach all the group members directly. But in the quietness of your room, as you well know, you can link up with every member of that healing group, and you can use energies to reach them. You may, if you wish, for instance, use this one. As you breathe in, the divine life fills me. And as you breathe out, visualizing the particular member of the group, the divine life fills you and sends your energy to each one of them, creating this wholeness between the group. That is an indication of how breathing rhythmically can be coordinated to the donation of energy to the group. And whilst you are sending energy to the group members, more energy pours into you. I'm always saying to people that the way to get more and more energy, spiritual energy as well, is to get rid of it, is to express it. And the more energy that you can express in passing it out to mankind or passing it out to ventures that lead towards truth, beauty, and goodness, the more energy will be flung through you. There is no limit to the spiritual energies that are available. There is an awfully harsh limit to those who are able to procure them. And the devices that I have suggested here bring those energies into play. So service to mankind and learning to breathe rhythmically. The bellows breath is extremely valuable in this connection. Now, as the outer major center begins to integrate, it passes its energy to the other two head centers. It receives its energy directly in through the wings of the rotating wheel, the symbol of the outer major center, and always symbols are useful. It is the Westerner's constant plea, give me images and symbols that I can meditate on. Well, here is one that you can put in the sacred square inch of the brow. The symbol or image of your own outer major center, and the symbol of it is, of course, the winged wheel, Now, this winged wheel, as a symbol, of course, is that which receives energies that are related to staying power. Staying power. How many people don't fail because they haven't got staying power? The staying power of spiritual energy, the staying power of the artist to finish his work or to complete a piece of research work against great odds and so on. Staying power. And the beauty of this energy which is radiated to the other two head centers is that it gives you creativeness into extreme old age. Creativeness into extreme old age if outer major chakra is aroused and is able to feed its energies to these two continuously. We must also remember, of course, that the brain fits in here, that the brain itself is desperately in need of added energies at this time, and the energy that we're talking about coming from the outer major center sprays and irradiates the cortex of the brain, improving the memory. My memory has improved and improved and improved through the last 10, 15 years since I have practiced meditation more and more persistently. The ability to recall, the ability to, these faculties are well known in my own ashram. There is no diminishment of the memory in such individuals who have the outer major center functioning, as normally occurs with people after the age of 50. There is a difference of polarity in the memory, but it is improved. Outer major center. Then we have to consider this center known as the brow center. In fact, looking at it at the front in the early stages, it is a two-petaled lotus. It is a two-petaled lotus, but as it begins to fill out, the petals become engorged, they begin to overlap each other, and are hardly patent at all by the time that the center is fully opened. Very important to have some basis of the visual image of the chakra, because the higher self, as you begin to unfold, will tell you, will flood you with the image of the chakra that it wants you to center your consciousness on. That is part of the process of opening the third eye, that the higher self informs you of the center that needs your attention. And how else will it inform you except through visual images? Remember what Aristotle said, the soul cannot think without an image. And so let us now place our attention in the region of the brow, the sacred square inch between the eyebrows. What matters are related to the opening of this particular center? We would say any act of focus. Any act of focus. I don't think we in the West are able to understand the nature of sustained attention or concentration, which the yogis called dharana. And when the dharana is maintained for long periods of time, it is called dhyana. And the highest conceivable personage to a human is a Daihan Chohan, who is able to sustain his concentration for vast periods of time. We're looking at ajna. We're looking at ajna, the brow center. It's very important to recognize these words in your reading. Ajna. Ajna is always aroused by any act of focus. Think of the difference between seeing and looking. Merely seeing and looking. Looking and focusing and concentration and sustained concentration. All these are part of the act of focus. Now we say that the discipline required here is to study or focus upon the classics, the classical teachings of ancient wisdom in particular. And by that we mean those works written by the masters of the wisdom, those beings who have been on the planet as men, who have trod their way into the higher kingdoms, and who have left behind them records of their experiences, records of their difficulties, their travails, their struggles in climbing the mountain face. Always remember that the mountain top of initiation, which is the goal, the mountain top of initiation is one which is reached by two alternative methods. There is the long route of creeping around the foothills and winding around the back of the mountain and finally coming to the top. And that takes about 777 lives, as we have seen. Or there is the alternative way of approaching the mountain of initiation, which is why Capricorn rules initiation and mountains, approaching the mountain of initiation by frontal attack, by going up the cliff face. And when we do this, the process is dramatically shortened to a few lives. And if we approach any mountain face with a view to climbing it, we of course need to process ourselves in advance. We need to exercise our limbs and to train if we're going to go up the mountain face. And so we call these spiritual disciplines, in which you exercise your faculties and prepare for the harsh ascent. And that harsh ascent is known as the path of initiation. And a desperately difficult process it is to crowd into a few short lives the resolution of many, many problems of personality and the coordinating of the personality to spiritual effort. And yet as we climb, the view from the mountain top becomes more and more splendid, and of course we all would say that this journey is worthwhile. Now, those who have trod this path have left behind them records, famous records. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is an example of some of these records. A little fragment called The Voice of the Silence by H.P. Blavatsky is another classical teaching about the disciplines required to go up the mountain face. And so we say, study the classics, the secret doctrine, the teachings of Blavatsky, I would say Annie Besant, C.W. Leadbeater, Rudolf Steiner, the teachings of Gurdjieff, the teachings of Alice Bailey, and I might add my own as well, to this classical stream of ancient wisdom. And the point is that as you study these works, you are sending out their note, the note of these works. But you must remember that the masters who were responsible for them exist in the ashrams of the world. And in studying their works, you establish a rapport with them. It's as if you are sounding your note with a tuning fork. You are sounding your note with a tuning fork, and the note is picked up in the chords, the chord of the appropriate master, in the great violin or veena, which is the ashram itself. And the moment that this is established, energy flows from the master concerned or the ashram concerned into this brass center. And so the brass center is opened through this rapport established through studying the occult classics. Then there is the thousand-petaled lotus. And I would remind you that all these things must be done simultaneously. You do not open one center and ignore the other two. You open them simultaneously. You do not spend all your time locked up in a cave somewhere studying the classics and ignoring mankind. You will serve mankind, you will study the occult classics, and you will meditate. You will meditate. And so the third center is open through the process of meditation. And the meditation must be, in fact, a constant process. It is not something that you take a stab at when you're in a good mood. It is something that you need to do constantly. And by constantly, I mean each day faithfully, morning and evening if possible, or at least once a day. And the technique of meditation, irrespective of whatever school teaches it, the technique of meditation is basically this: to clear the mind of thinking processes and to create a space between the thoughts, and in the space between thoughts to visualize, to create visual images, remembering that the symbol or the image is part of the language of the soul. And so you learn in the space between thoughts to create willfully, to visualize in mental matter objects for meditation. And so you might learn first of all to visualize, let's go very primitive, visualize a triangle. Then learn to visualize triangles that have various colors, a blue one, a green one, an orange one. Then the next stage is to visualize a triangle in color and see it as a pyramid. Perhaps a pyramid in one color, then later a pyramid in several colors. And I can't tell you how important it is to learn to visualize. Visualization is very important. Begin to choose symbols for visualization which are pregnant with meaning. They are ready to give birth. They are ready to give birth to that which will transport you into the higher kingdoms. And so there are all sorts of symbols that are pregnant with meaning. And what you need then to do, so one, visualization. 2 is to select a symbol which is pregnant with meaning, a pregnant symbol or an occultly important symbol, and then you learn to concentrate on the most important part of the symbol. The symbol might be the Master's face. The symbol might be the Master's face if you know what it is. It could be the face of the Master Jesus. And what part of the face would you obviously concentrate on? On the eyes. And so always, eventually, the element of focus must enter into meditation. You focus on what is visualized, but you focus upon the most important, the most pregnant part of what you visualize. So that's the second thing. Visualization, focus on what you have visualized, and then breathe. Then breathe rhythmically. And I suggest the bellows breath, which I have already taught you. Breathe rhythmically. Now those 3 factors produce a stabilizing influence which enables you to penetrate the eye of the needle. And the eye of the needle is the entrance into the kingdom of heaven. You must learn to go through the eye of the needle. The eye of the needle is a marvelous image or symbol for focus. That's what it symbolizes, focus. A needle symbolizes focus. Very, very important. So, I go back to my earlier drawing. And don't worry if you haven't understood what I have meant for the moment about meditation. Meditation is not something that you can pick up in 2 minutes. But certainly it is true to say that meditation must be practiced. And you are meditating no matter how early the stage of meditation is. Even if you are only in the first stage of 5 in meditation, you are meditating when you reach that stage. And you gently push your meditation through the stages to sustained concentration on what is visualized. The object of meditation is what is visualized. However, that's not my subject here tonight. Now, when these 3 things are practiced simultaneously, then there begins to emerge very rapidly the faculties associated with the third eye. But we must also live this process. It is not something that we just keep for an hour a day in the quiet of our own rooms. That's not acceptable. One must learn to live the meditative way of life. The meditative way of life. You must change your life. You must change your life in many, many ways indeed. There must be new values introduced into your life. And we call this process of changing your life, changing it extensively, and leading the meditative way of life, we call it psychosynthesis. Psychosynthesis. And I sat at the feet of the man who originated the concept of psychosynthesis, Roberto Assagioli. Psychosynthesis. Yes, a very good word, very, very explicit. Psycho meaning the psyche of man, which includes his higher self and the little ego. The total psyche of man must be put together. All its component parts, including the soul and the ego, must be put together. The great symbol of psychosynthesis is the flower. The flower is the great symbol of psychosynthesis. And each chakra or flower or lotus that we meet in the process of moving our consciousness up the plant of the spine, each of the chakras that we open on the spine leads us and heralds and warns us that we have reached another point of psychosynthesis. We have integrated yet another part of our psyche into us. Psychosynthesis. Synthesis, the putting together of. And so, here then is the soul, and here then is the personality, the ego, and here are the personality parts. There they are, and that's your present level. There's your present level of your personality. That's before you begin to work upon yourself in the processes that I have described. However, in psychosynthesis, you must learn to break up the old personality. The old personality is not good enough. What you have to do is to choose a higher point of consciousness, a point of consciousness much higher than you have had in the past. Your aims, your attitudes, your behavior has been at a certain level. Now you choose a higher point for all of these things, and you begin to break up your old personality into fragments, throw away a lot of the fragments that you don't want anymore, and build that which is good into a higher position. And so you fragment, you break up the old personality progressively, you erode it, you shatter it. You can do this only if you are observing the esoteric disciplines which enable you to do it. And now you choose a higher point of consciousness which is nearer the soul. The soul can do that to it, but the soul can only reach to that extent the lower nature. And so you learn to transfer the elements of the old personality that are worthy to the higher point of consciousness, and you begin to fill in other things by new spiritual habits, by leading the meditative way of life. You begin to fill in new elements in your personality which is at a higher level. A higher level. Let me give you an example of this. A young man in the Midlands of England, an actor, led a very dissolute life. He frittered his life away on idle matters. And he was one day offered the part of Thomas à Becket, the saint, in the play Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot. And he accepted it with alacrity because it is a wonderful part, and it was, in fact, a very important production. But when he accepted it, he soon found that the character of Thomas à Becket was entrancing to him. He was fascinated by it. And he decided that he would, just for the sake of the play, just for the sake of 6 or 7 weeks of rehearsals, he would lead that kind of life, the life of the saint, the life that Thomas à Becket was living, as it were. And so he did this. He changed his life just for the rehearsals. He was very careful to stop his old dissolute ways, and he began to introduce new things into his life. And he found that it helped him to play this part better. And the rehearsals went ahead, the production came up, and he was brilliant in the part. Brilliant. And when it was over, when the production was finished, he found that he couldn't go back to his old life. He remained at this higher level. What he had put into effect as practice, as a fantasy perhaps, as a concept, he now felt that he had to continue to live it. He had brought his old nature up to a higher level of vibration. And this, of course, is what we're talking about here, the matter of psychosynthesis, reassembling of the personality elements to a higher level. What are the kinds of things that one needs to do in reassembling your personality at a higher level? There are certain basic things. I'm not going to give you any more than 1 or 2 of these just to illustrate. You can find the answer to these questions in the occult classics that I have mentioned to you. You should, for instance, begin to practice detachment, detached observation of your personality. The second stage of astral projection is one which is very indicative of this process, of learning to get outside of your personality and to sit down and to sit in judgment on it, to look down on it and watch how it has behaved itself in the last few days or weeks, and to observe this with great detachment. Detachment from the things in life is very, very important indeed. It does not mean that you're not to have wealth, but it means that the wealth is not to be something of a lodestone to you, an attachment. You see, when you go through the eye of a needle, you cannot go through the eye of the needle if you are cluttered up with a lot of earthly attachments. If you are very, very rich in attachments, you have many, many responsibilities because of your immense wealth. If you are rich in prejudice, if you have these riches, you can't get through the eye of the needle. The eye of the needle is a tiny little point here. You have to plunge through this tiny little point. When you bring all your consciousness to that point, it is powerful indeed. You stand on a shoe that has a flat sole, you will never mark the floor. If you use a stiletto heel and stand on it, it will mark the floor very easily. And if you can bring the whole consciousness to a point here in the way that I've suggested, then indeed you will have reached the true proof of detachment. There are many things that we therefore go by. We say, kill out ambition, but live like one ambitious. Kill out ambition, but live like one ambitious. I'm ambitious. I have no ambition in the world to be recognized and have a Nobel Prize and things like that, but it would be fine if they came along. It wouldn't matter to me. But I am very ambitious that the peoples of the world should be made aware of what lies within them and the potential that lies within them. I'm ambitious about that, and therefore I teach it. So there are many things that you have to examine in your life. Kill out ambition, but live like one ambitious. Very important indeed. And so we say that the matter of psychosynthesis is part and parcel of leading the meditative way of life. Now there comes the next stage of unfoldment, and that is to reconstruct your subtle bodies, reconstruct the human aura, in fact. The human aura needs reconstructing. You have, of course, an aura that has been the result of energy emissions, energy effluence of many years standing. The aura we have described in previous classes here, or in previous lectures. It is a globule of energy constantly emitted from the interpenetrating bodies. What we now are trying to do is to reconstruct ourselves completely. And the way in which you reconstruct a house is to pull parts of the old house down and bring in new materials to reconstruct the new. And of course my analogy here is very useful indeed, because the house is often the symbol of the personality vehicles. If you begin, when you start to tread the path of initiation or unfoldment, if you begin to have dreams in which you dream that you are in a house which has dirty windows that need cleaning, in a house that has cobwebs hanging from parts of the roof, that is dilapidated and leaking with water seeping in, then you're being told by your higher self that your personality needs refurbishing. It needs psychosynthesis. It needs reconstruction. And indeed the soul will tell you in that kind of language. Or it might use the motor car as an image instead of the house. Whether it uses the house or the motor car, what is being told to you is to reconstruct your energy bodies. And so, through that simple analogy, we say you need more energy of a higher quality, in other words, the material to reconstruct the building, and you need to break down, as I described there, break down the old elements of the nature and allow new elements to be built in. But where does the energy come from for this reconstruction? It comes from the soul. That's the energy you want. You don't want the energy of food, which is of a low order, to rebuild yourself. You need energies flowing from the soul. And these energies we call Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. The energies of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. And these energies can be encouraged to flow more and more into ourselves. The soul's not going to feed you with more energy just to aggrandize your personalities. Oh no. Oh no, not indeed. But the soul will provide you with all the energy you want if you are giving yourself to mankind, if you are teaching, if you are healing, if you are providing mankind with evolutionary stimulus. Always remember the definition, the occult definition of spirituality. Spirituality is unrelated to priests and their clerical garb and what they say. Spirituality is related to effort. It is the effort that we put into raising the awareness of those around us, including our own awareness. The effort that we put into raising the awareness of those about us. Sometimes their awareness cannot be raised because they are ill, and that means that they need to be healed. But healing is part of teaching. Healing arises from ignorance. And when people are taught the right kind of things, especially about themselves, then the sickness disappears. Healing is therefore a process of teaching. That's why both healing and teaching come under the same ray, the ray of love wisdom. And so we say that you must bring energy down, and the energy is Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. Recognize what these energies are. What is Atma? Atma is divine persistent will. Divine persistent will. Atma. And it loves the Ajna center, and the throat center, and the sacral center. The energy of Atma, will always descend. It's divine persistent will. Not a will that evaporates at the first sign of opposition, the first sign of stress. It is divine persistent will. How can we manifest that? How can we bring more of it down? The best way is to choose a lost cause. To choose a cause that is lost but is very good. A very high cause, something that you can fight for and struggle for, and use every element of your fiber and know that somehow or the other truth, beauty, and goodness is going to emerge from it. Even if you lose. I've fought for lost causes all my life. Again and again and again. Magnetism was one of them. Struggling to show that we have not only been brought up in a magnetic field called the Earth, but we evolved in a magnetic field and must surely be reactive to changes of the magnetic fields around us. And so I had to go through medicine for 7 years. When I had passed my medical studies degree, I had to turn my back on my colleagues and tread a lone path in order to do the things that I regarded as important, to fight for causes that I think needed to be established. And one of them was magnetism. And so I alienated myself deliberately. It was inevitable, had to be done. That cause hasn't been won. May not be won in my lifetime, but it's closer. You say, what must you do? I don't know what you must do. What do your personalities tell you to do? What have you got capabilities for? Find out, assess yourselves. And that's part of the process of discrimination of the real from the unreal. Don't underrate yourselves, don't overrate yourselves. Know what you can do, what you're suitable for, and go out and do it. Oh, but what about my employment? I need time. That's your personality issues. Don't pester your soul about them. Don't ask your soul to resolve things that your personality should resolve. Don't go to mediums and ask for advice there. You have to resolve it. And there are techniques and ways in which you do it, of turning inwards. Yes. And so, you manifest will, divine persistent will. And as you do so, the will will flow down into you. And then there's Buddhi. And Buddhi loves the heart chakra. And Buddhi loves the 1,000-petaled lotus. And a little bit for the solar plexus chakra as well. And all the time these energies, as they pour down into you, are transforming your aura, turning it into a glorious, many splendid things. Buddhi, compassion, the complementary to Atma. And immediately you begin to practice, express in the world buddhi, harmlessness to all living things. Practice it. Don't just talk about it, and it's damned hard. It's very hard indeed to express buddhi, to express discrimination of the real from the unreal. What things are real in life? What things are eternal and will go on forever and are not transient like shadows on the walls of the cave that Plato described. So we learn to express buddhi, harmlessness, discrimination, compassion. These abilities must be expressed in life. The ability to love without asking response. Hard, very hard indeed. A love that demands response is solar plexus chakra. What we're asking for is that you love selflessly. I will love you no matter what. Not I will love you and I'll tear your throat out if you don't love me back. And so this stems from that jealousy and all the other paraphernalia of buddhi gone wrong. Yes, the heart chakra qualities. And the more we practice these things, the more the energy flows down into the aura. And then there's manas. Manas is abstract thought. The ability to think about abstract matters. The ability to think about things that have nothing to do with your survival. Nothing to do with your progress, your personality aggrandizement. Things that are related, but not related to mankind, but not to you directly. And that's hard. The ability to look at a mountaintop and appreciate the blueness there and the splendor of the mountaintop. We're different from animals in this respect. It was the first thing that we gained, the ability to practice abstract thinking. The animal looks at the mountaintops and sees the blueness there and says, is it food? No. To hell with it. To hell with it. We can appreciate these things dispassionately. Love them. Abstract thought. And the Caregate method is based on abstract thought. The ability to learn how to manipulate and use abstract thinking. And so we bring these things down into the aura. So we have the materials. We are clearing up, clearing away the debris of the old personality. We're ready to reconstruct.